Welcome to everyone as you're chiming in here. And where are you today, Hollis?
I'm sorry.
Where are you today?
I'm in Minneapolis.
Oh,
What's
wonderful city.
cool? Are you in San Diego?
I live in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, okay. Is it wet and rainy there?
It is, especially now, but
Yeah.
and is it Danye, is that how you pronounce your name?
It's Danae.
Danae. Okay. And
Danae.
where are you?
I'm in Des Moines, Iowa.
Okay. And what is the origin of your name? It's a wonderful name.
Oh, thank you. It's actually my full name is Danilyn, which is my dad's name is Dan and my grandma's name was Helen. So my mom just kind of smushed them together. And then she ended up calling me Danae. I have no idea where she got that
Oh, but it
from.
sounds kind of cool.
But thank you.
Yeah.
I enjoy it now. When I was a kid, it was torture because there was a boy in my very small class in the rural town I grew up in, and his name was Dane. And
I
nobody knew at the
know.
time in the 80s how to use an accent or what an accent even was.
Yeah, I'm
So
sure.
yeah, but I
Especially
get
in
lots of compliments
Iowa,
on
you
it now.
probably would have
So
stood out.
yeah.
Yeah. And welcome to the folks that are just joining us. So I'll put up some slides in a few minutes, but mostly I just want to give people a chance to land and to maybe share a bit about what brought you here today, just so I know kind of how to focus our conversation. What's sort of on your mind? What are you curious about? Yeah.
Well, I'd just like to know more about what you're offering, what this is like. I think it's easy to experience it than to try to have it explained to me. So
Okay.
I think that's kind of what David, I've been on one of your other calls, but I just like to be in this and kind of in the room.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, please.
I am. I'm in the midst of determining what I want my next formal development experience to be. I'm kind of a self-growth junkie, and I am
Okay.
always doing my own work. But every couple years, I want an experience that is more formal and with other individuals. And so I've been looking at different coaching programs to advance.
Okay.
I hold a PCC, but I want to advance my skills. And so this was mentioned to me by a colleague, and I'm interested and excited to see what transpires.
All right, wonderful. And we have some more faces on the call. Wonderful. So what brings you here today?
Well, I'm actually part of the other program, the ID Way. And this is my first program with you. And I during the whole process, I felt like um, I was missing kind of something, like there was something more that I was supposed to know before I dove into that. And I think that narrative coaching is what I need.
Okay.
So I kind of want to see it in action.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Hello, Laurel.
Hi, I want to understand better what you mean when you say something like people can change their stories.
Okay. All right. We can do that. Anybody else want to check in? Per.
Yeah, hey, David. We've actually met before. I've followed your work for a long time. It's just
Okay.
the first time that I've been able to organize around
Okay.
getting to something of yours formally, like Luke Burgess and Robert Biswadiner and stuff like that. And
Okay.
so when the email flood started coming in, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'll make one of those fit. So just thought I'd come in and grab a session.
Okay.
And I think it was like, is it Dane? Can you pronounce your name so I don't bastardize it? Whoever, yeah.
Danae?
Danae, thanks. Danae was saying, was looking at maybe a little bit more formal coaching piece or adding that as a piece, as a PCC, okay. Same kind of thing.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. And we have a chat box open, so if things come up or it's a small enough group, you can also just put your hand up and we'll answer anything as we go along. So let me just give you a little bit of a preface before we sort of dive into some more of the materials. So I've been working in the coaching space for a little over 25 years, and developed narrative coaching through the course of finishing my PhD in 2002, and got involved largely in the academic side of coaching, writing a lot of papers and books and things in coaching. And one of my passions at the time was to really think about how I sort of viewed people and change and growth. And I found at the time a lot of coaching felt too transactional for me and too linear and rudimentary in a way that didn't really match like my experience, for example, as a grief counselor and how people actually grieved and what they actually needed. And I felt like as time went on and the world got more complex, that coaching needed a deeper, more natural way of being in conversation with people. And so the source of the narrative coach work is really twofold. What did I observe the literature and the research suggested about how people actually develop? And then two was my observation of what I actually noticed worked for people. So I like to think of myself as an enlightened pragmatist. I come from a place of consciousness about people, but I do this work in large part because I just believe it works better. And what people find is that they can shed a lot of things that they thought coaching was supposed to include, as discovering they really aren't as necessary or as important as we think. And you'll find that narrative coaching creates a much more natural human way to be in dialogue with another human on a journey of change. And so I'm just going to put these slides up for a minute and just sort of share a few pieces about kind of what this is all about, and then we'll talk to you a little bit about what the program actually looks like. So this is one of my favorite images that it felt in the early days of coaching that people were enamored. My horse is more beautiful than your horse, or this year all the horses need to be white, or and there was a lot of shoulds about coaching. And I started to realize that we were failing to grasp that our horses were actually on a carousel. They were all going in circles. So it didn't really matter in some ways what color they were. And I felt there was a lot of jockeying around fads and trends and things about coaching. And I thought, but isn't really the point of a horse to let it run free? And so I started to realize that I wasn't that interested in competing in other spaces. I've given a lot to the coaching field over the decades, but I'm much more interested in helping humans grow and then helping understand their own growth so they can do the same for the clients that they work with. And so while there's a lot of academic rigor underneath narrative coaching, that's not necessary to become a narrative coach. It's interesting, it's validating, but if that's not your cup of tea, no worries. You'll actually find a lot of this is actually quite practical. And one of the things that we do a lot in the program, and matter of fact, the first two modules are nothing about but about yourself, because we can only travel as far with our clients as we have gone ourselves. And so it doesn't mean we have to have had the same experiences, but it means we have had to been in some of those spaces. So for example, I have a passion for supporting people through grief journeys. So if we've never really allowed ourselves to grieve losses in our own life, it's really difficult to do the same for our clients. And so we want to help you discover yourself in the first couple of modules. Who are you and what matters to you and what journey have you been on? And what would you like to bring in service of others? And what you'll find again by the end of the program, the most common thing we hear from graduates is their gratefulness for who they became, even more than what they learned. Because they start looking at life differently, they start looking at coaching differently, and they end up with a much more easeful practice. And so we've talked a bit about kind of what brought you here, but I want to just, these are the sort of 3 sections of today. Again, feel free to stop me at any point. I'll stop anyways to get some questions, but if there's anything that we do that you'd like to know more about, let us know. So I always like to start with a little bit of humor. So we'll just start here. So having been a lifeguard when I was in college, we actually will stand in the water with our clients. We don't sit up above them or around them, sort of barking at them this way or telling this. The person just wants to not drown. And so for me, we don't do any of these things. And so we do remain calm ourselves. So we're going to help our clients to be present too. But in reality, we don't do any of these things. So I want to just, this is a caricature. So recognize it's a caricature. It's not the sum total of the overall complexity of coaching, but I want to make a simple distinction that will set in motion a lot of what we can say about narrative coaching. So if you were to reduce a lot of coaching down to its essence, people would say the coach asks questions. And the client thinks about our questions, and then they answer our questions, and then we listen to their answers, and we formulate sort of a narrative about what we think is going on or what we think is necessary. And then that sort of informs the next question that we ask. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. So these are all valuable skills. And the reality is what happens often for many coaches is they get so caught up in this that they start worrying more about asking the next question than paying attention to what's actually in front of them. So we don't teach you, we have a whole session on inquiry, but you'll see in a minute, it's a very different focus of our inquiry. And so our listening has a very different purpose in narrative coaching. And part of that comes from the research, which from both psychotherapy and coaching, which suggests that the factors related to the client have far more impact than all the other factors put together. And yet in coaching, we often focus too much on ourselves, even in our efforts to be helpful. And so we're going to kind of sort of flip that paradigm when we think about narrative coaching. And so for us, our first act is generally not to ask a question. That the coaching sort of flow and process is actually much more oriented about what's actually happening in the field, that energetic space between ourselves and the client, what's happening in the relational dynamics. And so we're witnessing what we're noticing about what's unfolding, but also what's happening with the client. So our inquiry is not for us to gather information or for us to generate information. Our questions are generally to help the client inquire into the moment in time. So a quintessential narrative coaching question would be, as a client is talking, what are you noticing about yourself right now? Or what are you noticing about your story? So we're paying attention to the storyteller. We're listening to the storytelling experience, and we're listening to the story itself. Any one of the 3 can provide us clues about what we might want to investigate with the client. But when the client is responding, they're narrating their experience, not answering our question. So our listening is not for us to gather more information so we know what to say next. What we're listening for is what observation can I reflect back to the client based on what I just heard them say. And then that forms the basis of our witnessing of them. And so what happens, and we're doing this because all along during the session, we're trying to equip the client to help themselves. And anything that we do that drives too much the conversation creates too much dependency on ourselves as a coach. And for me, defeats the purpose of coaching, which is to elevate the human being that we're talking to. And so one of the things that this means when we're freed from having to have a repository of all these great questions, which again can be useful at times, is we can make things much simpler. And so one of the practices that we do in the program early on is we give you 4 questions and to help you have a conversation with only 4 questions. And so these are the essence of kind of what each of the 4 phases of the model are all about. And we try to, again, the last thing I want my client to do is feel coached. And so for me, we try to make the questions as simple and as direct as possible, to help them stay in the present moment with the experience they're having as they're telling us the story. And we'll come back to some of that in a bit. We can answer your question, Laurel, about how do we change stories, etc. But for now, I just want to stop there and just see if any of these early ideas have sparked any questions or thoughts from the rest of you. And then we'll talk a bit more about what it's like to be a narrative coach.
David,
Yes.
why did you call this the narrative coaching? I mean, some of what you've mentioned may point to that, but I just mentioned here, why do you call it narrative coaching?
So I have a bunch of degrees in the social sciences. So and around in 1996, I think, when I went to my very first coaching event, I didn't really actually, frankly, care for a lot of the coaches. That was a lot, and that sort of was in LA. It was kind of a multi-level. It was like kind of just a culture that didn't really do much for me. But I really liked the presenter a lot. He was a very seasoned coach even then. And I thought, I think this coaching thing is going to become something. And so, I could have, this could be kind of the art of Davidness. This could have been called all kinds of things. But I was very drawn to story. So that's the primary anchor. So all I do is invite clients to tell me stories. And we'll talk more in a bit, but they're formulating their story in real time as they're sharing that with me about whatever the dilemma or question or choice we're trying to make.
Yeah.
And I have a long background in Jungian psychology and a bunch of other things that allow me to listen at many, many levels of story, in the unconscious, in the social dimension, in the mystical dimension, in the spatial dimension. And so I just found that I didn't need anything more than their stories, because their psyche or their part of themselves is going to bring things into the story that the client's often not even aware of. So when we're witnessing them, we're often helping them see themselves in a way they could not see themselves. So a lot of what they discover is surprising to them. Like, wow, I didn't know I felt that. Or they might shed a tear and like, wow, that moved me more than I realized was true for me. And so I found coaching as a methodology, as a community, the closest I could find. It's not therapy. It's not counseling. It's not consulting. My ultimate, because I work a lot in the global coaching space, my ultimate mission right now through this new project I'm working on around the 5 maturities is to find a better word. I think the word coaching has become oversaturated, overused. It means too many things and almost nothing now. Everybody's became a coach and a thought leader and an author during the pandemic. And it doesn't really capture the depth of what people like me do. But I don't want to be put in a singular box. So coaching was the closest I could come.
Yeah.
Narrative therapy was already taken. I love Michael White's work, but I didn't want to be a therapist. And so narrative coaching was the closest I could get to what I think I'm actually doing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that back very much.
Yeah, Per.
Yeah, 2 things. First, can you say a little bit more why you that you put the limit on, like, we can only go as far with our clients as we've gone? I think one of your slides was saying, like, and you related it to, like, well, how have you processed grief and stuff like that? Because tell me your story about that.
Yeah, so what I observed for like, if you're somebody that struggles with like, you like things to be logical and linear, and you have a chaotic client or a client that's in massive complexity, most of us will tend to try to, or not consciously or even overtly, but will shape the conversation to allow ourselves to remain comfortable and confident in what we're doing. And so if we don't feel comfortable around strong emotions, and you have a highly emotive or highly charged client, most of us will instinctively shut down a little bit because to make ourselves feel safer. And it doesn't mean, again, it doesn't mean literally we have to have, been through a divorce or been fired or whatever our client is going through. It just means that they need to feel confident that the range of experiences they might want to have, that we can meet them there. And again, it doesn't mean we have to have had that experience, but we have to be able to be there with them. Otherwise, we abandon them in the space they might need to travel to do the work they need to do.
Sorry, right now, before, it just sounds like a lot of bias detox going on. Like,
what do you mean by that?
Just when you're saying things like, well, if you have somebody that's has deep emotions, and yet you have to know your limit. It's almost like a self-awareness.
Yes.
Right. Knowing that, okay, I know I have a particular bias against this. And I don't mean bias as it just might mean that anger is a really tough thing for me to process, whereas grief isn't, right? So I guess that it just sounds like there's a detox, because they're as you're assuming, we're not people coming into the program maybe aren't aligned like that. So I guess I was just trying to understand that a little bit.
Yeah, so it just means we have to be aware of ourselves. So if we know that we get activated or triggered by anger, and then we end up with a client who's experiencing a significant amount of anger, we have to be aware of ourselves so we don't, unconsciously shut down or close them down, or, turn the conversation somewhere else. It doesn't mean we have to be, highly versant in anger ourselves. It just means that we have to be able to be in spaces where they might go.
Okay. And then the second thing was just, maybe you'll get to that later, is when you're talking about this, what is the, well, maybe coaches in the field, maybe not you, the scope of engagement where people will actually engage narrative coaching until you come up with the new thing. So in other words, because it seems a little bit more expansive, in the environments that I've seen you in before, or when people have described working with you in the past, it's been quite a bit much like a more expansive relationship rather than, say, just executive coaching. Or
no, I've never done coaching the way that most people do coaching.
Okay. Yeah.
Again,
so can you talk a little bit, will you talk a little bit about where a narrative coach might be positioned?
Yeah, so in this part of this gets back to Hollis's question earlier. So why did I call this narrative coaching? I needed a name. So it's most like coaching. It's the community that most recognizes what I do. But for me, and I want to just be really clear that I have no interest in you becoming like me, no any more than I want to become like any of you. So you will find your own path through this work that works for you. So in many ways, and this is going back to Natasha, your question or your reason for being here, there's a common sort of psycho-spiritual philosophy that underpins all of this work. It's a way of being with other people in a sort of service capacity. And so my encouragement for all of you is find a way to integrate the philosophy in a way that works for you and serves your purposes, knowing that you're going to bring your expertise, your passion, your experience to this. We had 2 physicians in our last program. One retired, one is trying to help save medicine. And so for me, my job is to remain in integrity with myself, integrity with my promise to my client, and beyond that, to become whatever I need to become to accompany this person on the work they're going to be doing. So I don't take a lot of stock in cliches like you should never give advice or you should never no, it's just rubbish. You have a human being that's drowning or lost or curious or excited about a possibility. And again, well, as long as I'm in integrity with them, our agreements, and myself, within reason, I will become whatever they need me to be, within things I feel qualified to go do. And I feel like sometimes, and so I've given a lot to ICF, because it's the world's a better place when ICF does well. And I've also challenged them at every single turn because I feel like they're now holding the world back or holding coaching back. So we're working on that. But for me, it's like I want us to mature ourselves so we know ourselves well enough to know where we can go and where we can't go. And then to recognize that we're walking along a multidimensional human being, trying to understand something, address something, resolve something. And we don't know till we get in those spaces what they're actually going to need from us. Now, I can easily justify that it sits within this larger container of a coaching engagement, but I don't want to be limited. I can only stick to coaching, whatever that means. Even if I asked all of you, we'd all come up with a different definition of coaching and what we think it is. So I don't even bother. I put it out there in terms of that's what people recognize to buy. But then as I'm talking to them, I'm trying to understand, do you need me to be a chaplain? Do you need me to be an advisor? Do you need me to be another older man who wants to talk to another older man about their life? And that's the part of me that's going to be most salient for what you need right now. And as long as I've not gotten ahead of them or fallen too far behind them, I'm doing my best to walk alongside the client as they're on their journey. All good? Other thoughts or questions at the moment? Everybody okay?
David, I had one more reflection.
Yes.
The way you described in response to Per's question was, it's like you're trying to be humanely and humanly responsive to the individual as they present themselves in that conversation. It's less a formula.
Yes.
You know, it's less a sequence of questions. I got to follow this order and this sequence and this process to move them forward. But it's less about me, what I do to move them forward. It's much more about accompanying them. It sounds like that. At least
Yes.
am I on the right
Yep.
track?
You are.
Okay.
So I mean, in a minute, I can tell you the science or the literature behind the narrative coaching model. But one of the easiest ways to think about the model, to your question, Hollis, it's not a series of steps. It's more like a 4-paned window that we're looking out onto with our client. Where are they on their journey, and what might they need next from me? And so we, like, for example, I'll get that later. I'll get ahead of myself here. All right. Okay, so let me just come back to the slides and see where we get to with our questions. All right. Okay, so I'll let you just look at this and enjoy for a minute. So for each of us, our rock is bigger. But my experience of most people that join our programs is there's things they end up putting down. If you're trying to drag this boulder into your coaching conversation, A, you have the wrong shoes on, but B, you're not going to be as available or nimble with your client. I want you to feel like I think it was a woman on the bicycle on the right-hand side. When I started coaching 25 years ago, I might have had 2 or maybe 3 clients in a day, and I'd be exhausted, utterly exhausted, because I was trying too hard to be a coach and do the right thing. And now I can run full-day retreats and be as fresh in the evening as I was in the morning, because I'm not carrying anything much. I'm putting everything I know, all my degrees and everything I know in my back pocket. I know I only bring out whatever is useful, and the rest just stays there. And so our conversations end up feeling like a bike ride on a nice spring day, wherever that person is riding their bike. And so it's one of the ways in which we ask our participants to sort of track themselves. Do you find yourself feeling tired? It may be that you might want to look at the effort you're putting in that might be more than necessary. So we think of ourselves sort of like a tugboat. That's a tiny little boat that's perfectly designed to push large ships around. And so we're just kind of nudging, we're suggesting, we're observing, we're noticing, we're doing things to help a client who was undergoing a change process before they got to us. They're going to be in this change process after they leave our coaching. And so we're just saying, in this time right now, what do they need from me most? And that's what we want to pay attention to. So as part of that, I just want to share with you the principles of narrative coaching, which some of you might have seen, but just to kind of share this, and then a couple of thoughts, and then we'll see what more questions we have, and then we'll look at the program itself. So if you've got everything about narrative coaching and remember the first dot point, you'll be well ahead of the game. So, which is that we trust that everything we need is right in front of us. And so if you're in a coaching session and you get lost or confused, or you daydream, or you forget, or which happens to all of us, is we just invite our students to just come back to the center and like, what are you noticing right now? And so again, we don't want our coaches to be lost in their head, trying to analyze what's happening, trying to figure out what's happening, to figure out what's the next perfect thing I should be saying. In reality, we want them to stay in the present. So everything we do in narrative coaching, by and large, is in the present moment, whether it's the past, present, or future that we're talking about. And so we're working with that field, everything that's happening in front of us. What are we noticing about that? Oh, we both seem kind of agitated right now. So what happened in this story time that somehow seems to be putting us both off kilter? We do our best to help us with that, to be fully present to what is. So a lot of what we're doing, especially early on in narrative coaching, is what we think of as situate. And our only job when we begin a narrative coaching conversation is to welcome the human, help them notice themselves, notice what's present for them, what feels important to them, and to do all that with as little judgment as we can. We're not trying to get them anywhere. We're not setting agendas. We're not setting goals. We're just welcoming a human so they can relax, feel safe, and start to trust us and the process. And then the last one, the third one here, we borrowed from Ram Dass, which is to speak only when we can improve on silence. And that is not nearly as often as we think. If you were to, in the old days when I used to travel a lot more to do demonstrations, this dot point was very baffling to a lot of coaching students, because oftentimes they would be in this master's program. They will have known the person I'm doing the demo with for some time. And in 8 to 10 minutes, I could get farther with this person than they had all year. Why? Because I was approaching this in a very different way than many of them were being taught. And it was very frustrating. They said, and particularly because they would say, you didn't even hardly say anything. You just sat there. And I said, I'm not being paid to talk. I'm being paid to support a human who's trying to accomplish something. And I'm finding that my silence is actually more generative than most of what I would otherwise say. And there's a slide about this in just a minute. And so we use silent very creatively in narrative coaching. And then in terms of our work with clients, again, one of the things that I learned and observed really early on in my coaching journey was that the main thing that most adults lacked, which undermined the efficacy of coaching, is they didn't have a safe place to practice. They'd have all these amazing experiences in coaching, and the vast majority of the time they really didn't actually do what they had talked about in the session. Why? Because it wasn't safe. They're going back to a team that, generated all the old behaviors they're trying to change, or a family, or whatever they were returning to. And so I started to realize that if they couldn't do it with us in the session, they were highly unlikely to do it when they left. That's why we always feel so motivated when we're at the gym, but not so much when we're sitting on our couch, not thinking we should get up and go to the gym. So we spend a lot of time in narrative coaching creating spaces for people to have new experiences they wouldn't have otherwise allowed themselves to have. So it might be if you are there to get, you've just been promoted as a client and you want to get some coaching and about how to have more kind of a more of a leadership stance as opposed to a contributor stance. Part of that, you're realizing, oh, I'm just not very assertive. I don't like speaking up. I don't like, well, I might, well, let's right now, let's do that. Let's create experiences for you so you can feel yourself talk out loud. I might get them to stand on top of a chair and talk to me. I might give them, say, what are the 2 things you wish I would do differently as your client, as your coach? Because I want to create this felt experience of actually being assertive. And then we want to create experiments so they can continue to grow with that. So they're building up the muscle memory, the identity, the awareness to go do that. We don't use a lot of jargon in our coaching. We don't talk about psychological concepts, or we don't use like a lot of models and things. We just try to work with the lived experience of the clients. Last 2 pieces, we do our best to only work with the material that's actually in their stories. We're using their language, their metaphors, their energies, their emotions, and that's what we're working with in the process. And then lastly, one of the things we pride ourselves in, I suppose, is that we recognize that to make bigger changes in any of our lives is often quite a daunting task for people. And since the narrative coaching model is built in large part around an advanced version of a rite of passage, we put a lot of stock in the thresholds that people have to cross in order to change. And so we want to be there when they're birthing a new story about themselves. Yeah, so I'm going to just say a couple more things and then we'll stop. You okay? So this is a bit about, I'll tell you the story of this photo that I took if you join the class, but I won't take the time now. But so unlike most coaches who ask first and listen second, we listen first and then ask questions. And everything we say is based on what's been said already or what we're hearing or noticing. And therefore, silence is not what happens after we stop talking. Silence is the ground, the very ground from which we're even speaking and being together in coaching. And so it just creates a much more, I find, a robust container for those conversations. And we're doing this for this reason. So I took a lot of liberty in paraphrasing Albert Schweitzer and throwing a little bit of Henry Nouwen in there as well to sort of, this is a lot of what we stand for in narrative coaching. All right. So that's a lot, but I'm gonna stop there and see what wonderful questions you have.
I saw the word. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Laurel.
I think Laura's Laura, you're on mute, my friend.
Okay,
Yes,
so are you at a place now where you can address how people change their stories?
I am. So, so we are narrative animals. We tell stories that we have for hundreds of thousands of years. And so a lot of what we're doing is creating a safe place for people to tell more of the whole story. And my belief is that our stories are very tied to our identity and that we tend to behave in ways that perpetuate our preferred identity, even if it's one we don't like or it may not even serve us. So my observation is that oftentimes when coaches get too caught up in behaviors and outcomes, for me, it sometimes feels like building a beautiful house on a bed of sand. Because you're trying to put a house on top of an old story. It doesn't work. The old story will always win out because we'll always will return. And there was a great movie. I can't remember the title of this movie, but there's a great movie years ago about a young man. I think he was French or something, who was bullied when he was younger. So over the course of the movie and a lot of time, he becomes really fit and strong and big. And then he encounters something that reminds him of his childhood past and he reverts back to his old self, even though he's now much stronger than the person who was bullying him again. Because his identity had never caught up to his physicality. So when people are trying to change a story, the first thing we help them do is to recognize the story that's driving them now. What kind of a person or what kind of state would you be in to tell that kind of a story? Or you might have a story in which the only version of the story the client knows how to tell is as a victim. So then there's no sense of agency. And a lot of it could be totally understandable. We could have a lot of compassion for that. But it's really hard to change a story you have no authorship over. And so for starters, we try to then help them build it through experiences, allowing them to feel things, experience things, experiment with things, starting to build a foundation for if you came from that place and that story about yourself, what would become possible. So like a lot of us, grew up with varying degrees of anxiety about looking dumb or making a mistake. We have some notion we should be perfect, right? Which makes it impossible to ever learn anything new because as a beginner, you're never perfect for the most part. So the work for them might be to do what we call serious play, to let them do funny things or do outrageous mistakes. And so if you've ever, I was always a big Monty Python fan. They had this great skit about the Ministry of Silly Walks. So we will do astounding things with people, not because we want them to go do that instead of what they're doing now, but to free them to realize that you have a whole range of possibilities of experiences. Mm-hmm. And when they make a bit of careful, judicious fun of themselves, they start to realize, oh, there's more wiggle room here than I thought. Yes, exactly. I'm laughing at your Terry Gilliam reference. And so then once they're freer, so if you were wanting to move in this new direction, what kind of things might you need to learn? What kind of things might you need to shed and compost? Who do you know that's really good at that could maybe be a model for you? And so we're scaffolding up behaviors on top of an emerging new story about themselves. And so it might be that the headline for that news story might be, "It's okay for me to be a beginner." Maybe they grew up in a household where there was a lot of pressure to be successful, or you were compared to well-known people in your family or somebody that was really something. And there was no room to make mistakes, you imagined. And so it was very hard for you to admit mistakes or to try new things. So rather than go right at your objectives, I want to change this about myself. First, we're going to have you try what you do now so we can get a feeling for what it needs to shift in that for even to create the possibility that you could become this new thing. And so I know, enough about your own story, Laura, about, there's some of the health challenges you've faced. Mm-hmm. So I imagine you've been through the whole gamut of stories about what that means and what that's like and how you think of yourself. I can imagine if you're like me, I've been really sick all year. Some days I feel horrible, like, oh, I'm failing, and I'm, other days, oh, I'm gonna do this, and so you kind of move around, and they generate different behaviors. They generate different somatic states, different sets of possibilities. Our body is exactly the same in some ways day to day, but we tell different stories, which then has huge impacts on our body. So one of the things we'll teach you a lot in the program is to, again, pay attention to what's happening to the storyteller as they're telling their story, what's happening to their facial expressions, their energy, their body posture. Mm-hmm. What's happening to the story itself? Why is it here? What purpose is it trying to serve? What's it trying to draw our attention to? And then kind of beginning to pull all these together and helping the client begin to hear themselves talk about themselves or their situation in new ways. And then over time, and we've got a couple of really cool practices for this, they start to galvanize that around a new narrative identity that then creates that platform for them to go do new things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there other questions or thoughts for right now?
David, some of the words that come to mind as you describe, like you give the picture of the tugboat, walking alongside, supportive, creating, experiences, not explanations, almost like a creator or curator, like curating experiences.
Yes.
And so much of this is responsive. It's almost intuitive. It's not formulaic, does that, but part of that is cultivating in us as coaches or whatever you want to call it, the capacities and the kind of acuities to pay attention to what's happening in them, in the person you're speaking with, to kind of say what might be a good next step relative to a experience like having to stand in a chair or whatever, kind of is that kind of.
Yeah, and so we're just basically equipping them to go do more of this on their own when they're not with us. So the vast majority of the progress that clients make often is catalyzed in the conversation, but doesn't happen in the conversation. It happens when they leave, but we don't do enough to support them when they leave, which is, again, why we create experiments in the sessions. They've already had a go at this, often more than once. And so we're building up a repertoire of things they can do for themselves. But I'd like to, if I can, just share a brief story. It's my all-time favorite narrative coaching story. You probably will hear it again in the class if you take it, but it's just such a great, actually, ironically, it was my very first paid workshop in narrative coaching in 2006. These were all coaches at a very famous business school. So pretty high level coaches, pretty high status program. And so this was, it was a fabulous day. And so at one point on the second day, they asked for me to demonstrate what we were doing and what they were learning. Fair enough. And so I asked for a volunteer, and the least likely person I imagined volunteered. Retired engineer, came from a part of the world that's very sort of stoic and contained, and just not the kind of person you thought would be vulnerable in front of a group of his peers. So I thought, oh wow, game on, here we go. And so we sat up front, and everybody sort of gathered around us in kind of a horseshoe shape. And so I said, what brings you here? What would you like to talk about? And he said, well, we just moved house. Great. I have no idea what this is about or why he's saying that, but apparently this is important to him. So I said, tell me more about your move. And he made a couple of comments like, well, we were downsizing, and we've just been moving across the last few, like the last couple of weeks or something. And then somewhere in that just very brief sort of summary of what was happening, he said, yeah, and we got boxes all over the place. And I thought to myself, well, that's really interesting. They've been in this new place for several weeks and they still have boxes out. I thought, well, maybe they're busy, but I thought there's something about the vibrancy of that word boxes that really piqued my interest, to your point. So the whole entire conversation was less than 10 minutes. So just keep that in mind when I tell you the punchline of the story. So my first question was, tell me some more about the boxes. And so then he started talking about that. And I said, well, kind of just walk me through the house. Like, what are you noticing about the boxes as they're lying around your house? So he walked me through all the different rooms. And then when he was done, he said, there was something bothering me about his story, but I couldn't figure out what it was. So I just sat there quietly for a few seconds and thought, what is it about their story that's just not resonating for me? And not because I need to know, but somehow there's just something that wants our attention in the way this story was told. And then I realized he didn't talk about the kitchen. And I thought, at first I thought it was an oversight. And then I thought, when I move, the kitchen's the first thing I unpack, enough so I can make us have because I've always bought food to sustain myself and who's ever helping me move. And I want a plate for a sandwich or a glass for whatever. And I thought it's just really interesting. And I don't know what it means, nor do I have to assume it needs to mean anything, but I was just really curious. So I said, I'm just noticing that you didn't talk about the kitchen. It gets really quiet. So I just wait. And I said, I just said again, so tell me some more about what's happening in the kitchen. Again, he starts to talk, and then you could feel the whole room like leaning in. What's he going to say? And then he said, we saved that for last. And I just waited. And so Carolyn, thanks for coming. And you can always reach out if you have more questions. She has to leave. And so what's that about? why did you save this for last? And there's this really long pregnant pause. And to paraphrase the sentence he said, it was in essence, because my wife is dying. And he didn't quite say it that way, but that's where that was the outcome that we sort of learned about. And so then, I'm like, I'm just holding the space for this sentence. And I said, I'm sorry. Would you like to tell us some more about that? What I'm not realizing, there's not a dry eye in the house, because they know this man really well, right? And so, none of them knew this. And he talked about how it was her favorite room in the house, in their old house, that she was always she hosted all the family gatherings, all the holiday festivities, everything. And she was at a sort of an illness that was making it more and more difficult for her to cook. So they said it was too painful to go in the kitchen. Now, every single question I asked him after the first one was only about moving boxes. And we went from, I've got boxes all over the house, to about 8 minutes later, my wife is dying. I could feel, you could feel the energy in the field. There was something he was not telling us, but I had no idea what it was. I just said, and so one of the things we'll teach you a lot about in the program is the ability to internalize and externalize the stories. So I sensed from him as a person, if I sort of sat sort of adjacent to him and up until he said that, and then I turned my chair, because my intuition was that if I tried to go too directly at him, he would shut down. And so I wanted to, and so the boxes, so he could talk out here about the boxes, in a way that and that's what allowed him to feel psychologically safe amongst his peers, to be able to go where I don't think had planned to go, but there he was. And so for me, I've always just used that as, not that obviously the vast majority of coaching conversations are not like that, but I just use that as my favorite example, because we get so caught up trying to hunt for the meaning, or what's this about, or what can we go do? And we work way too hard. But in reality, his wife's dying was present when he sat down. He's at some level was gauging, what do I feel safe enough to say? What's useful for me right now? Because I asked him later when we were debriefing, long after had you planned to say that when you sat down? And he said, no. But the space that you created and the trust I have of my colleagues allowed me to finally say that out loud for the first time. And so for me, I just find that if we trust the story, if we trust the space, if we trust ourselves and the person, they'll take us where they need to go. Because the conversation could have stopped at a number of other destinations, which would have been just fine too. So this isn't a better conversation. It's just the one that he really wanted to have. There could have been other outcomes that we would have gone to that in that space, but that's where he chose to go. So in this work, to your point, we're paying close attention to what's trying to unfold here. And it's all happening in the story. It's all being revealed through the characters in the story. And sometimes we need other framings or other knowledges that can be contextualize the story or bring a perspective on the story. But by and large, the simplicity of narrative coaching is we just ask our clients to illustrate what they're experiencing or illustrate what their issue is. And in that story is the vast majority of what we need.
David, when you give the backstory, prestigious school, all these folks in the coaching program, least likely individual, and all these fellow students know him, but did not know that about him.
Yeah.
And who knows for how long they've been in classes together, but no idea that was happening. What an amazing moment for him, you, and then everybody else in that room.
Yeah.
To create a a safe space where in 10 minutes time,
Yeah.
he would, that's just, I mean, stunning, wonderfully stunning.
And so what you'll find, I mean, you build up a lot of confidence in this work, but fundamentally what I find I build up more and more is humility. I try to come in with a completely empty cup. And there's a great Robin Williams quote that we use a lot, and something around, everyone's facing a battle that we don't know about. So be kind always. So there's a profound kindness and compassion that is in this work, even when clients are doing really positive and wonderful, amazing things through our coaching. Again, what you find is learning how to be this way with people and building on what you already know about all this and how you are this already in your life allows you just to be present with clients in ways that they may not have anywhere else in their life. And I've had clients who've just said to me things like, can you just come sit by me for a while? And I just want to talk out loud. You don't even need to say anything. But if you just sit here, I'll feel better and I'll feel safer and I can just say things and hear myself talk. And I've had clients who actually pay me. And I said, they would say, I'm done now. You can leave. I've done nothing. Well, I've done a lot for them. But for me, I just sat there and was their witness. Yeah. All right, Laura, take care. Yeah, so let me just share a bit about, Laura was with us last week too, so she'll knows what's about to come. So I just want to share a bit about the logistics of the program, unless there's any other questions you have for right now. All good? Okay. So just a bit about the program. This is really simple, but it can be helpful for people. So there's 9 modules in the program. Each module has the same flow. You will not be surprised to know that the program's design is built around their narrative coaching model. So the first session is what we think of as initiation into that topic. It's a live Zoom session with me. We also have a dedicated forum in our circle space for this cohort, in which we will also post questions, and you're able to put comments, questions there. It's quite a lovely space for people to interact with each other, as well as ask questions of the team. And keeping with our sort of philosophy, we don't load you up with more information the second week. We actually send you out into the field to do assignments. So these are, we have a series of assignments, 3 of them for every module. And the stretch assignment is a personal assignment for you to experience this work for yourself. So it's about your own growth. It's just for you. You can do it in your own way. And the field assignment is a practice around one of the skills or mindset pieces related to that module. So, and one of the really fun ones is one of the things that we want to strengthen in all of us is the capacity to create dissonance. Can we ask the harder questions of our clients? Can we give them more robust feedback? Can we take the conversation to a deeper place? And maybe that makes you uncomfortable. So one of the assignments gives you a variety of options, and with all the assignments, you can customize them to serve you. But one of the tasks we give you as an option is, I would like you to go out for a meal this week and send your food back and complain it's not good enough. Even if you take it back 5 seconds later, I want you to hear yourself say that. Not because, again, I want to promote that behavior, but because if you can't even send a meal back that you don't like, how are you ever going to confront a coaching client? And so for me, the field assignments are really just for you to build your relationship with that topic. What do you know about yourself? What strengths are you bringing in about that topic you already have? What questions is it bringing up in you? What invitations to maybe grow a bit is it bringing up for you? But we're not trying to do that for you or teach you about that. We're letting you just sort of bump into yourself and just notice, and we'll give you some structures around how to do that. So that when you come back to the implementation session, which is another live Zoom session with either Vicky or Ellison, our 2 core faculty, you're not doing this to kind of process all the things we've taught you. You can certainly ask questions or get examples for what came up in the first session, but you're mostly just processing your own experience, just like we would do in narrative coaching. And what are you discovering and implementing what you're learning so far in this module? And then we're putting you into peer pods by time zones as best we can. And we're giving you some practices around a core narrative coaching skill related to that topic. One of the benefits you all have if you join us next year that no one's ever had before is that we are partnered with Ovida, which is an online platform, which is I do a lot of advising for them, and they're actually building more and more of my work into their platform. But it creates a space for you to actually be recorded while you're practicing. It's only seen by you and whoever you're practicing with, but you can invite your pod to give you feedback if you want. But it's just a great way for you to see yourself. And so you might want to, maybe you're working on a certain aspect of your coaching style. And so you don't have to just go on and practice doing it, like try to model, like, here's how good I am or something. You could go on there and practice 10 different ways to say it. And then you can watch the video and say, that one's too strong. It's like looking for that Goldilocks space, or I don't like that one. Oh, that one's kind of interesting. Or I like my face there. And so you start to actually see yourself trying new behaviors, and then getting some feedback on what do your peers think about this. So it's a great opportunity for you to get real-time feedback while you're trying to integrate what you're learning, so that you come to the next module with a sense of relative completion about what that module was about for you. And then we find that people take on average, if they do everything that is available to them, it's about 10 hours a month. Some spend more because they want to do reading or they want to do other work, but that's about the average. These are the first 3 modules. They're really about your mindset. They sort of introduce you to the narrative coaching model, by module 3, to begin to get a sense of what that feels like and what that means in terms of your role as a narrative coach. And then we kind of move on to the narrative coaching process in more depth, and then some 3 core narrative coaching skills. So this is just the last piece here is just a list of all the things that come with the program. Again, the sessions are offered twice a day at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern time. So you're welcome to come to whatever is convenient for you. And some people come to both, but pick the one that works for you. And then these are some things that we're building for next year. And deeper practice groups on the platform, a new certification process, some specialized master classes in some of the work that goes deeper in narrative coaching around things like trauma. And then we're building a way for narrative coaches to connect to each other. But for now, I'm going to stop and see what questions you have at this stage in our conversation. Is it Gihan? Is that how you say your name?
Jahan.
Jahan. Okay, thank you. So we haven't heard from you. So what's on your mind at this point?
I came here really out of curiosity. I'm doing another coaching certification, and I'm just looking for complementary modalities.
Okay.
And caught my eye. I'm really into storytelling. And I heard about your book from someone, so I looked into that, and then I sort of just started following through and felt down the rabbit hole to find this. So I just figured I'd join and see what it's all about and how it adds to what I'm doing.
Okay. And are there any questions or reflections you have at this point?
Not really. I mean, some of it's very familiar. I don't know if you know Claire Zammit.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, Institute for Women-Centered Coaching, Training, and Leadership.
No, I do not know.
She actually talks a lot about this sort of the old story and the new stories. So some of this sounds a bit familiar to me. But I feel like this kind of like focuses in on that section, because there's like the whole, like you create the container, identify the old story, start working on, what we need to get you to the new story, etc. And it sort of sounds like there's a lot more emphasis on that sort of part in what you do.
Yeah.
really, yeah, using that's which I find super interesting, and I think
Yeah.
really interesting. And I did a certification also in trauma-informed coaching.
Oh, wonderful.
So I really feel like people's stories is, that's who we are, and that's how, or that's what we tell ourselves we are.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so for me, I mean, for my own self and also for future clients, this sounds like a very interesting,
Yeah, and so I find a lot of times coaches sort of default to this black box. Well, we do all this and then magically come out the other side. And so I've tried to spend a lot of time unpacking the black box to understand, well, what actually happens in there, and what does enable people to let go of a story that might have served them their entire life. And it comes back to humility for me. So, so if you've got a client who's 62, they may have 60 years with that old story, maybe even more. And a lot of those stories are going to be pre-verbal or highly somatic and not very conscious to them. So, I mean, I think sometimes we're too glib in coaching about, I don't even like the word transformative because it's not accurate most of the time. And B, it's not really true. I mean, there are transformative things that happen through coaching. There are lots of them, and that's part of what makes the gift of coaching. But like for me, like an aha moment doesn't mean anything. It's just a little brain sparkler. It only does something if the person's willing to do the harder work of what does that actually mean and how would I embody that. And so like for me, I've done a lot of things in my life to resolve my own traumas. And so one of the things we have a narrative release, which is the philosophy that underpins everything. And it was part of what is in the program that Natasha's in now, just finishing. So we're going to do a whole program next year on the gates. So it's grief, attachment theory, trauma, embodiment, and shadow work, all in one program.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, from this perspective, from this philosophy. And so, but it's only going to be open to narrative coach graduates because we want them to come in with some fundamental understanding of the philosophy. Otherwise, it'll be a bit harder to maybe grasp things. But
yeah, and just that you brought up all of those particular topics, I did have a thought early on of, is this work sort of does it serve clients with specific issues better than others? For example, someone who's like looking into leadership coaching, or someone who's dealing with grief.
So again, it goes back to my fundamental job is to grow the client. So there are some clients that are not ready for that. So when we run these monthly Beyond Coaching Experience calls, and our whole theme this whole year has been readiness. Again, I think when we're not, again, sometimes we drift in coaching. We're not actually client-centered because we're coach-centered in a way, even though it doesn't seem that way. Because the only thing I'm really measuring for my clients is what is this human being ready for right now? Everything else is pretty moot. Doesn't matter how brilliant you are or how great your insight is or your activity is if the client's not ready to receive it or participate in it. And so we find that some clients either their issue is simpler, or they're in a less developed state where a more transactional or more direct approach would be fine. They don't need this deeper work, right? If somebody like this just suddenly lost their job and it was a shock to them, if somebody has an expertise in career counseling would be really helpful for them. They don't need to, what does this mean? They don't need all these other things yet. They might later, but in the beginning, like, how do I get started? And what's the job market like now? And what do I do? And that kind of a coach might be brilliant for them. And there's other coaches that are more switched on. They've done their own inner work and they're seeing the bigger picture, or are open to seeing the bigger picture, for whom this can be quite helpful.
Yeah, that's kind of how it feels for me.
Yeah.
And that's sort of more the type of client I'm interested in working with as well.
Yeah, likewise. And yeah. So somebody else had their hand up a minute ago. Was that? I don't remember who it was now. I think Per, yes, okay.
Yeah, is that the completion of the presentation or anything? Or
yes, I don't have any more. I have no more slides.
Or we're going to talk about, because I don't really know what like costs are or
okay.
registration time or anything like that. but I have like more, I had a couple of esoteric questions, so I didn't want to
Okay.
hijack the presentation part of it.
Yeah. So you'll get an email right soon after this with the link to register and to get all the information about the logistics. The program starts in the middle of January. It runs for 9 months. So it's over with the graduation in early October. The cost is $34.97 because we are giving you access to the platform now, so which has a little bit of cost to us. So we've raised the price a bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
And all that will be available in the link that you'll be sent. So
perfect. And then earlier you had said that if we had an interest in seeing some of what the literature is that this is grounded in, is there a place that you would recommend? Would you recommend your book or?
So the book would be the best place to start. I mean, some people don't like the book because it's too heavy or serious, but I wrote that in the middle of a horrible divorce. And my mission was I needed to get it done. And I wanted to have all about narrative coaching in one place. So it's sort of like the Bible of narrative coaching. I would write a different book now, 10 years later, but that's fine. It's a great resource in terms of all the background in this. So the lit reviews all in there. And if you have, there are some specialized reference lists around attachment theory and others that we make available if you want that. And I'm always happy to share anything. I've got about 60, no, probably 70 publications now, all of which have reference lists as well. So you can geek out as much as you want.
Yeah. It's just that the scaffolding theory, scaffolding narrative theory is actually pretty messy. And so if you had a nice little like scaffolding for that, it would be fun. And
so the first chapter of the book would be a great place because that's where I review all of the primary sources for narrative coaching.
Okay. And the last question, I'm really sorry, is you said something that was pretty poignant. You said when you were talking about the poignant story about the guy that's known, and Hollis was highlighting like how significant that was. You said it's where he wanted to go, and I just find that interesting because like depending on how they're conditioned, like where. I guess how do you feel comfortable saying that that's where he wanted to go? Just because that's how he presented, or because
I asked him.
Okay.
Yeah, and he wasn't planning to go there, and I said, how did it feel for you when you went there? And he said, well, I couldn't not go there. It was so present to me, and then he's an engineer, so he had to give me the logic he went through. But he just said, it just kind of came, and it was right there, it was present, and I thought I've been holding out and not sharing this, and I know these people, I know they care about me, and so he was very sort of matter of fact and casual about it in the end. And if I don't know if any of you are parents, or remember when you were young. So as my daughter moved through junior high and high school and now in university, and she's telling me stories about things, I'm always asking myself, what fraction of the actual story is she telling me? And how much of this is actually true? Because she doesn't categorically lie to me, but I know from being that age, and I know sometimes I know more than she thinks I know. She thinks I know about the situation. And I know she's just like she's leaving out certain key facts and so as clients are talking to us, they're unconsciously sorting what they're going to tell us and what they're not going to tell us. And so I try to, again, if the more we activate the better parts of themselves or the more mature parts of themselves, the more they're willing to bring to the table. But we don't make any judgment like you're a better client because you can share more, but we're trying to gauge what's possible for this person right now, and what do I need to do or be that would enable the highest part of themselves to come forward. Again, with no judgment about right or wrong or better or worse.
Yeah, I wasn't so much concerned about judgment. I was concerned about the trauma piece that you were talking about, that people are conditioned to respond in particular ways. So if you have somebody that's inexperienced with trauma, there's a lot of conditioned responses, right? So that's kind of why. So, but you asked him afterwards. So in other words, you were going, here's where you needed to go.
I never told him anything.
So afterwards, you're just doing like the debrief is what you shared with us.
Yeah, because if you think about anytime you've made a major change, or like I'm in my mid 60s now, I've never been here before. It's a very different generation than my father, who died early in his life, and so everything's unknown. I've never been here. I read up and I talk to friends and do all these things, but still. And so I think oftentimes coaches get stuck in this illusion that we need to know in order to move forward. And we need to understand, and we need to think about things and do all that. And so what we're doing is modeling for our clients how to stand in the unknown, so they can discover what is it I need to pay attention to here in this story that might reveal something that I need to be doing or feeling or being or whatever's that about. And so I could feel that something important was happening. So I trusted that the boxes were going to be the door to that room. I had no idea what he was going to share. I had no idea where this is going. I just felt there's something about this that's going to be very generative for him. And then the biggest, and this is where our own self-development is so important, I needed to hold space for him, which was probably only about 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity before he could finish that last sentence. If I had been anxious, or I tried to rush him or tried to do anything, it would have broke the bubble and he would have probably not finished the sentence. And so I just had to trust that whatever he's going to say next is going to change everything. And it did. But I had no idea what it was, nor did I need
so you just held the threshold space for him.
Exactly. I just stood there and waited for him. And I did kind of, as often do, I did turn my chair a little bit to say, I see you, try to close in create a little bit more. It was only a matter of a few inches, but create a perception of greater intimacy. And basically connoting to him that I'm here, I'm completely at peace, take as much time as you need. And when you're ready, I said none of this, but I was just communicating that by how I was sitting with him. And then when he was ready, he finished the sentence.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Anything else that I can do to be helpful for you today?
David, just remind me, what's the name of your book? We've heard
It's called Narrative Coaching. It's right on, actually, in the background here. It's called Narrative Coaching. It's the definitive guide to bringing news stories to life.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Natasha, was this, just 1 second, was this helpful for you in terms of?
It was. I think I was struggling a bit with the program that I'm currently in. I feel like I was lacking some of the basics, and I do have your book. So I was kind of reading the book and then tying it in with the program. But I feel like I need more space to practice the skills and like the patterns, everything that you describe in the book. And hopefully what I've learned so far will tie in to this eventually. Yeah, but I feel like what you're describing seems like there is a lot of practice built in.
Yes. Yes.
Which I feel is what I need right now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and if I can be helpful with you in that and sort of bringing that together across the two programs, just you can always book some time with me. There will be a link in the email you'll get. If you want to talk about it some more, we can work something out together, okay?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Per, you had something more.
Cohort size, sorry, like last one.
So right now,
cohorts,
yeah. So right now, it's been an odd year because people are just all over the place and buying things. So I suspect we'll get where we normally get, but I think right now we have about 20 people signed up for the program. I imagine by the time we start, we'll get 30 to 40. And then the pods will have generally around 4 people in them, sometimes 5. And that all those groups still meet. And that's where you have a more intimate sense of practicing and build, closer relationships. And like I said, you'll be able to interact with the entire cohort on the forum. And then later, by the time you finish the program next year, you'll have an opportunity to connect with all the other narrative coaches that are in our community. All right.
I have a bit of an odd question, David,
Okay.
just because of I was reminded of it by what Per said. The people that are already enrolled, I don't know if you know that, but do you have a feeling if a lot of them are from the United States? I'm just asking because the people that I was with, they're all from Europe, so we were always kind of struggling to figure out the times for our meetings.
Oh, so I would have thought we do it that way to make it easier, so everybody's in the relatively the same time zone. So so I can answer your question, what made that challenging for you?
Because we had one person in England, one person in Switzerland, one person, and then me from Los Angeles. So we were like struggling to find the time where it will work for everyone.
Got
The
it.
time that worked for the other three people for me was in the middle of the night. So
So that, so that's a good, so we must have erred, something about the way you registered or we read your registration made us think you were in
I mean,
Europe.
we made it work,
Yeah.
but just because we were talking about pods right now,
Yeah.
I became curious.
Yeah, and so we do our best to put people together by time zone so that they make it easier for them to find a common time. And it was always the case, if for whatever reason your pod doesn't work out for you, let us know right away and we'll move you to a different one. So that just to simplify scheduling, or sometimes, for example, you might be an independent coach and you're with 4 people in organizations who keep having conversations about that, and you're not interested, or that's not your world, we can move you to a different pod. So
Thank you.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you for spending the time, and I hope this has been helpful. And if I can help in any other further way, let us know. Otherwise, hopefully you'll join us in January.
Thanks, David, very much.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, David. Really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
You're welcome.